Hello, I'm EJ. Welcome back to NonCompete. It's been about 2 weeks now since Donald Trump once again took office. I've spent most of that time laying sick in bed, barely cognizant of all the terrible headlines scrolling by on my phone. But now that I'm recovering, I'm coming to the sick realization that no, this has not just been a fever dream. This is all really happening. Elon Musk really did throw out 2 Sieg Heils at the inauguration. They really are going to expand Guantanamo Bay into a massive concentration camp for immigrants. It's all going down precisely as we predicted that it would. So yeah, things suck and they're gonna get worse. We should just go ahead and confront that hard reality right from the get-go. And you know, we here at NonCompete, we really wanted to jump in here with some, some sort of message of hope. I can offer you some hope. In fact, there is a lot of hope. We can be completely confident that in the end, these fascists are going to fail spectacularly. And in this video, we're going to give an approximate outline of how and why that is going to happen. I don't really want to sugarcoat this immediate short term. The next few years are going to suck. And a lot of people are suffering already, and the fascists are reveling in that suffering. They're going to push that cruel agenda of theirs as far as they can for as long as they're in control of the government. And right now, they are firmly in control. And those spineless liberals are not going to save us. Let's be very clear about that. Joe Biden spent his last few days in office trying to save the bacon of his family and friends with pardons and political maneuvering, last-minute legislation to help his cronies, the people in his camp. Kamala Harris's concession speech was a glib smack in the face, especially considering that she had just finally, in the last moment, called out Trump's fascism only a day or two before she got soundly defeated.
And may that work guide us, even in the face of setbacks, toward the extraordinary promise of the United States of America. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
Bernie Sanders and the squad have mustered only the most token resistance.
Our goal remains the same. We have got to educate, we have got to organize, we have got to put pressure on Congress to do the right.
And soft-boiled sock-dem types like Robert Reich want you to remain calm and accept your fate as overt fascism continues to rise in the USA. And I say overt fascism, I guess that's the first point of revolutionary optimism that we can identify amid all of this turmoil. See, in a very real way, this is all just the logical conclusion of the same trajectory that the USA has been on since the beginning. Fascism, as we say all the time here at NonCompete, is hardly a new phenomenon in America. This is not the first time we've had billionaire car manufacturers buying out presidencies and being Nazis. I mean, has everyone forgotten Henry Ford, the rabidly fascist billionaire car manufacturer who ran an anti-Semitic newspaper and received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle from Nazi Germany in 1938, turning Guantanamo Bay into a massive concentration camp, ugly as it is an escalation, but it's hardly the start of throwing immigrants into concentration camps in the USA, unfortunately. And we've been illegally holding prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, foreign detainees there, for a couple of decades without trial and in very inhumane conditions. See, the USA's ideology and its material history of genocide, enslavement, xenophobia, and white supremacy, this was all literally the template used by 20th century fascists like Hitler and Mussolini when they were erecting their fascist projects. The USA has also propped up and supported genocidal fascists around the world, from the Indonesian genocide of over 1 million suspected communists in that country, to Pinochet's fascist mass murder campaign, to the slaughter of 2 million innocent Vietnamese civilians under the fascist puppet dictatorship of the so-called Republic of Vietnam. I could go on and on for hours outlining the crimes and atrocities of the USA enacted around the world, especially in the name of anti-communism. The USA has lifted up the banner of fascism all around the world for generations. So why should anyone be surprised by what's unfolding right now at home? Why does this feel so shocking? And I admit, I even feel a bit shocked about some of these that are happening. Why is it shocking when it was all so gall-darn predictable? I think that what we need to remember here, what we need to understand, is that the major shift we're seeing is really just in the social consciousness and the aesthetics of the fascists. They're catching up to a shift in material conditions, which has been unfolding for decades now. But really, it's nothing new. It's just a change in mindset and affect. So let me explain in terms of everybody's favorite philosophy, dialectical materialism. You hear us preaching about dialectical materialism here at NonCompete in pretty much every video these days, and that's because we truly believe that it's the key to understanding all of this. The basic principle of dialectical materialism, if you're not familiar with it, this philosophy that was developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, is that the material determines human consciousness, while human consciousness can impact back on material reality. This just means that in human society, material conditions, that's the relationships between human beings and the means of production and that sort of thing, that's what really drives things forward, and consciousness can only impact back on those material relationships. And as we move forward, I think if that doesn't really sound clear to you, it'll start to make more sense, I hope, as we start to talk about the historical development of fascism in the USA. What's really shocking to a lot of people right now is that fascists are so emboldened to say the quiet part out loud as they do the terrible things they've always done in the USA. And yes, this does mean things have gotten worse materially, and that's because this emboldening of affect and mindset has led to an emboldening in reprehensible activity. But it's really just a development forward of that pattern of behavior that was always there. So let's take a look at the history of the USA since World War II, and hopefully, you'll get a better idea of what the hell I'm talking about right now. World War II was kind of a big deal. Not sure if you heard of it. It completely reorganized the power balance of the entire planet. As a result of that war, the United Kingdom went from the top. It lost most of its empire, and the United States of America was able to step in and leverage its way into the position of supremacy as the world's predominant superpower. The United States did this in a number of ways. First and foremost, it completely lucked out by being the only major power to not be utterly devastated by the war. The front lines never really came to the continental United States. Our industry and our infrastructure was spared, and this put us in a prime position to become an economic powerhouse. This power that we suddenly found ourselves wielding was magnified by diplomatic efforts such as the Lend-Lease program and the Marshall Plan. These were huge war and post-war deals that the USA made with especially European nations, where they invested billions of dollars, and Europe became indebted to the USA. And then the USA helped with the cleanup of the devastation from World War II in exchange for a huge amount of political influence and access to foreign markets for American corporations to go in and do imperialism all around the world and in places like the former British Empire. At the same time, the USA went straight to work kicking that Cold War into high gear. They began building up NATO and propping up anti-communist dictators like we talked about before, and they put pro-USA regimes in power all around the world, and this gave the USA, along with the Cold War that they were building up, the perfect excuse to ramp up military-industrial production, which gave American capitalists even more money, and it gave the USA even more status as the global anti-communist hegemon. And of course, the USA also engaged in a lot of shenanigans to position the United States dollar as the international currency. And they've been milking that and getting a lot of value out of that maneuvering for decades now. The upshot is that by the 1950s, the USA had come to enjoy a massively inflated position in the world. And you could really say artificially inflated. See, this position of superiority was very relative. I mean, yes, the USA did do a very good job, again, of leveraging its post-war position, but a lot of the benefits that the USA had were also really just the result of the abject destruction caused throughout the rest of the world by World War II. We were lifted up a bit higher, and our economy did grow pretty quickly, but also the rest of the world was just shoved down so much lower. That meant that the cumulative gap between the USA and the rest of the world was massive and magnified by both of those trends in both directions. And that gave the USA a massive superiority complex, which made the already established sentiments of American exceptionalism and manifest destiny, just kicked those feelings of superiority in average Americans into overdrive. See, to a large extent, the USA has been riding on that post-war high ever since, and these feelings of supremacy got a huge boost in the 90s, despite the fact that things were really in decline in the USA when the Soviet Union collapsed. I'm old enough to remember the fall of the Soviet Union, and when I was a child and a teenager, you can bet your Badinsky that the public education system and mass media used the USA's quote-unquote victory over communism as the cornerstone of propaganda, which ensured Americans that we had the best way of life in the world, that this was the end of history, that the USA was ushering in a new era of world freedom, and that I would be coming into adulthood in a golden age of global peace and prosperity. But the truth really isn't that the USA won the Cold War. It's more that the Soviets lost first, but the USA was definitely in a period of decline going into the Reagan era. It's had a few little kicks up here and there, but quality of life for Americans has been going down since well before the Soviet Union collapsed. So let's pause here and gather ourselves, take a look at how material conditions determined the social consciousness of Americans from the end of World War II through the end of the 20th century when I was young. We have enough hindsight now, I think, that it's pretty obvious. The USA really was doing comparatively well in comparison to war-torn countries in Europe, as well as colonially oppressed countries in Asia, Africa, and South America at the end of World War II. We went over all of that. It could honestly be said that in the 1950s, Americans, or at least white Americans, had some of the best living conditions in the world. Never mind that that was true largely because we didn't get literally all of our shit blown up like everyone else in the world did. What mattered for propaganda purposes was that we could feel superior to everyone else. And is that not truly the American dream after all? A dream of supremacism, a dream that we are better than everybody else, that our shit don't stink. Anyway, quality of life in the USA relative to the rest of the world has steadily dropped ever since that post-war boom era. Just as quality of life in the rest of the world was gradually increasing and that gap has been closing. That process has taken a very long time, in large part because the USA has worked tirelessly through the CIA, through aggressive war making, and through punishing economic programs enacted by USA-led organizations like the World Bank and the IMF to suppress anti-imperialist and especially communist governments, and to keep smaller and weaker countries subject to the USA's foreign policy agenda. But even the full force of the United States of America couldn't hold back the material forces of history forever. For all the propaganda, the USA has suffered a lot of humiliating defeats over the decades. We can talk about the stalemate in the Korean War, the utter loss of the American military in Vietnam, the abject failures at empire building in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, and countless other setbacks on the international stage, militarily and diplomatically. And so it feels a little hokey when American patriots blather on these days about the mighty and undefeated United States military. Now, that's not to say that the USA is not a threat to world peace. It objectively and absolutely does a lot of harm all around the world and continues to oppress countless nations through sheer ruthless threat of force. We should take that very seriously. But at this point, the USA is still very much riding on long past glories, and I think that's becoming increasingly obvious as time goes by, especially to foreign nations. I mean, we do still have the threat of force. It's a real threat, but over time, that threat is just getting weaker, just like everything else about the USA. I think it's safe to say that the United States is currently passing through a threshold where most Americans now have it worse than plenty of other nations. I mean, here in Vietnam, I have seen quality of life improve radically in the decade or so that I've been living here in many important ways, such as access to healthcare and public transportation and access to affordable, healthy food. In all those ways, I think most Vietnamese people already have it way better than most working Americans. And far more Vietnamese own their own homes. About 90% of Vietnamese adults own their own homes. Most Vietnamese have much faster and cheaper internet, and within about a decade, Vietnam's gonna have a bullet train that connects the entire nation up with high-speed rail. The energy grid will be almost fully renewable by that point, and we're already seeing a huge increase in the access that normal working Vietnamese folks have to things like luxuries and comforts, the sorts of things that American workers are beginning to lose their grip on. You know, this gap between the USA and Vietnam is definitely narrowing. I'm not saying that Vietnam is some kind of utopia, and I'm also not saying that Vietnam is the only country that's seeing this huge increase in quality of life. But objectively, all I'm saying is that the lives of Vietnamese people are steadily improving over time, while the lives of Americans are getting worse. Just the fact that over 50% of American workers can't even afford rent anywhere in the USA right now, to me, is proof enough that the promises of American exceptionalism that I was fed in the late 20th century have not come to fruition for most working Americans. And none of this should be surprising at all if you've studied Marx, because Marx predicted all of this about 150 years ago, specifically that capitalists would be hoist on their own petard. Corporations in the USA have gotten so huge and so reliant on global markets and imperialism that the USA no longer manufactures the essential material needs of life in our own nation or with American labor. The goods we need to survive are mostly made overseas, and the country that makes most of that shit? Commie pinko red China. And sure, the USA still has plenty of agriculture and farmland, but who is performing most of the labor to grow the food we eat every day? Immigrants. Public enemy number one, according to the fascists. See, this is where we begin to see the distortion in the consciousness of American fascists. The American fascist worldview has lagged behind material reality for so long that they're now trying desperately to play catch up, but they can't confront those stark reality that faces them, so they double down on old lies and craft new lies where the truth is simply undeniable. To truly document the development of American fascism would take way more time than we have here today, but we can identify some general tendencies. American fascists have dropped all pretense of late. See, when I was young, there was this trend, we called it compassionate conservatism. Republicans in the 90s especially liked to pretend that they just wanted a smaller government and more lenient policies so that everyone could benefit. You know, they pretended to care about minorities, and they tried to sweep the cruel realities of American policies under the table, or they just denied the atrocities that were committed by the USA.
Conservatives like myself, like Senator Coates, like Senator Ashcroft from Missouri, who are taking a lead in this area, believe that so far the evidence of the last 30 years of Great Society programs proves unequivocally that faith-based, community-based solutions are much more effective. And the question is, how can the government facilitate those solutions, and how can politicians and other cultural leaders use the bully pulpit to encourage more people to get involved and to accept social responsibility for those in need?
But nowadays, social awareness, social consciousness of the suffering which Americanism has inflicted both domestically and abroad on so many groups of people has been raised to such a high level, in large part thanks to the rise of the internet and social media. The truth just can't be as easily contained as it once was, and the ugliness of the USA's boot prints all over the world is undeniable. As such, the contemporary American fascist has come to embrace that cruelty, to revel in the suffering which the USA imposes on perceived enemies. Just to speak of it is considered quote-unquote wokeness and anathema to Americanism. You're not allowed to talk about the real things that America has done, or you're labeled woke, and that's turning into a new Red Scare of sorts. So you're expected to either embrace that cruelty, to revel in the suffering which the USA has imposed on perceived enemies, or to shut the hell up about it. And that mask of respectability that the compassionate conservatives wore has been reduced to a half-serious veil of plausible deniability, so that when Elon Musk throws out 2 Sieg Heils right in a row at the inauguration, it's just an open joke that all the Nazis can laugh at. It's the great lesson of 4chan culture. You can do whatever you want, and the capitalist media will basically give you a pass so long as you offer up a half-hearted lie that you didn't really mean it. Shucks, I was just joking. It's disgusting, and that's American fascism. You should also understand that American fascists are still mired in solipsism and exceptionalism. See, a major barrier to progress for the American fascists is that they still believe in the ideology of American exceptionalism. This notion that the USA is somehow uniquely blessed by God and can do no wrong and will succeed no matter what.
I'm proud to endorse and encourage you to get this Bible.
This is a notion that permeates the mind of the American fascists. They honestly think that there's some kind of God-given mandate and that America will win no matter what. The American fascist is morally solipsist. That simply means that American fascists determine what is right and what is wrong by just sitting around and thinking about it for a few seconds and letting their dogma be their guide. Dogmatism very much leads the way when it comes to American fascism, and this does open them up to making huge and sweeping mistakes, to making decisions that are rooted in prejudice and emotion while ignoring objective reality. And this senseless idealism is what will ultimately be the undoing of American fascism, but they will be able to do a lot of damage, unfortunately, before that inevitable collapse that is coming their way. American fascists have never learned that triumph of the will is bullshit. See, one of the hallmarks of fascist ideology is the idea that human consciousness can dominate the material world. It's the exact opposite of dialectical materialism that we talked about earlier. The Nazis believed in the 1930s in Germany utterly in the idea that they would conquer the planet and usher in a 1,000-year Reich of German supremacy. And they clung to this unhinged belief right until the very end, when reality came crushing down on them in that Führer bunker in 1945. It was such a shock that thousands of those diehard Nazis unalive themselves rather than come to terms with their own self-deception. See, the American fascist is on the same trajectory, but just at a different stage of development. Currently, they're embroiled in a frenzy of delusion. See, the objective conditions of the United States are dire, especially for workers. American workers are suffering, and there's no reason whatsoever to believe that the inane policies being shoved forth by the fascists are going to benefit American workers in any way. What's most likely is that there will be some short-term gains for capitalists and petty bourgeois and some of the most privileged people in the working class. But it's going to lead to a hell of a lot of damage to most American workers, the overwhelming majority of American workers in the long run. Comprehensive tariffs have long been proven to be disastrous for working people wherever they've been tried. The clowns that Trump is shoving into high office, they're not going to be able to govern effectively. They're going to fight with each other. There's going to be backbiting and backstabbing. This campaign against wokeness is a silly sideshow. There has never been a coherent definition of wokeness, and all of the alleged secret Marxists embedded in the deep state, they don't exist. This fascist witch hunt is for a secret group of Marxists that just don't exist. I mean, believe me, I wish that there were secretly all these Marxists just overflowing in the deep state and secretly running the government and trying to push towards the communist revolution. That would be rad, but it's not real. But they have to create these fabricated imaginary enemies to justify what they're doing and to justify the degradation of material conditions in the USA. They have to have a boogeyman to point to. I have no doubt, of course, that they're going to do a lot of damage with these witch hunts. They're going to wreck a lot of shit. They're going to hurt a lot of people. Of course, anyone who stands up for workers and for the oppressed and for the vulnerable right now are going to be in the crosshairs. We're already seeing that. We're already seeing them going after people who are trying to help workers. And there will be a lot of suffering, and there will probably be something like another Red Scare, another era of McCarthyism. But in the end, this is all just evidence that the American empire is deeply in crisis and flailing about for enemies to blame when the real source of all these systemic problems is the American system itself. The American fascists can scapegoat China and immigrants and wokeness all they want, but that line will inevitably lead to failure because it all amounts to rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The American fascist is incapable of addressing reality because the American fascist can't even see reality for what it is. This is all a recipe for chaos, disaster, and inevitable failure at some point down the line. Just look at the American fascist pet topics, immigration and China. Pegging all of society's problems on immigrants is a tried and true method of passing the buck whenever things go wrong in a class society. It's utterly absurd to think that immigrants are competing with you for your job. Do you really think that if they kick all the immigrants out of the USA, that you're gonna be able to go out and get a job on a farm and they're gonna pay you well to produce food like that? It's not gonna happen. It does not stand to scrutiny unless you're a fascist bigot. I mean, the fact is that undocumented immigrants are making petty bourgeois and bourgeois employers a lot of money. It's because those employers can pay those workers, those undocumented immigrant workers, next to nothing. And that allows them to rake in huge profits on that stolen labor value. And that isn't going to change. So you have to understand this. This immigration scare, yes, it's going to impact thousands of people's lives. A lot of people are going to get kicked out, and a lot of people are going to be thrown into concentration camps. But the people who remain are even more subjugated now. It's making things even more precarious. It's subjugating these immigrants even more. It's making their lives even more unstable. All the better for the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie to exploit these people and to profit off of them. And we, as American citizens, should see these undocumented immigrants as our comrades. Again, it's not like any of us are gonna go take over these jobs and get decent wages. None of this makes any sense unless you're a fascist and a bigot, and you're completely disconnected from reality. And the cruelty is the point. And now let's look at China. And I'm gonna be as objective as I possibly can be here, because I know that talking about China on YouTube is a good way to kick the hornet's nest. But let me just say, it does not matter in this conversation if you love China or if you hate China. It doesn't matter if you love Xi Jinping or if you hate him. It doesn't matter if you believe in the dream of Chinese communism or if you think it's all some kind of sham. What you think about that doesn't matter, because China is objectively, in material terms, kicking the United States' ass in pretty much every perceivable metric right now. And I want you to understand this. None of this is happening in a vacuum. And while we're in the USA, it can feel like the USA is the whole world sometimes, right? I mean, I get that. And that kind of America-centrism permeates even my mind all the time. I have to wrangle myself all the time on that. But there are other countries out there, and China produces the material needs for much of the world. And meanwhile, American manufacturing is relegated to a few high-tech industries and, weapons production, things like that, and a lot of service industry. But we also have to remember that quality of life for Chinese citizens has been improving rapidly of late, while for Americans, it has been slipping. All the other countries in the world are seeing this happen. They're watching this happen. They know that it's happening. In some cases, consciousness can lag. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who still think that America is some shining beacon of hope and that the streets are paved with gold, but that consciousness is changing around the world. And Chinese technology is coming into parity with the West and even surpassing Western technology in a lot of ways. And they're managing to keep prices low. I mean, just look at how they've humiliated American AI firms recently with this DeepSeek technology. Look at how Chinese electric vehicles of similar quality are coming in at like a quarter of the price of Tesla's cheapest model. And I've been all over Southeast Asia in the last couple of years, and I have maybe seen one or two Teslas out there. I'm seeing dozens of Chinese and Vietnamese EVs every single day. In this region, at least, they are dominating the market. And China is also primed to have a massive robotics revolution with an agenda to manufacture millions of humanoid robots by the end of the decade. And these robots are game changers. The USA, of course, has plenty of advanced robotics engineering companies, but there is absolutely no way that the USA could hope to ever compete with the scale and speed at which China is going to build out this really groundbreaking infrastructure. The USA is also slipping in terms of geopolitical strategy, and Trump's childish hardball tactics are only going to cement this shift and drive more countries towards Beijing in the years to come. Mark my word. Just look at that whole ugly mess in Colombia that we just went through. You don't think that Chinese diplomats were quietly stepping in to take advantage of all the nations who are super disturbed and turned off by the way that Trump is handling international relations right now? You don't think that China is falling over itself to step in and say like, hey, we're here and we're not gonna bully you like the USA. China is going to leverage this, okay? And the USA is cutting funds to USAID, which I just think is funny because that's like the CIA's biggest influence front. You don't think that China is looking at that and right now planning to press harder with its own international influence campaigns? And let me say it again, it doesn't matter what you think, and it doesn't matter what I think about China. I cannot stress that enough. We don't have enough power to influence China one way or the other. So really, if you think that your opinion matters, then you're kind of LARPing, I'm afraid to say, at this point, until we organize a hell of a lot more to where we could even begin to think about having some kind of impact on China. It's just a phenomenon that we have to just kind of understand for what it is. And right now, China objectively has the winning hand when it comes to geopolitics and international economics. And that's simply because China controls the essential means of production. And if you want my opinion, it's because Chinese people do study Marxist economy. They study the Marxist perspective of capitalism. Whether or not you believe that they're truly Marxist or whatever, they study Marx. Whereas in the US and in the West, they study bourgeois economics, which is really mired and steeped in false consciousness and pseudoscience. So Chinese people understand capitalism way better than the West understands capitalism because they've studied Marx. And American fascists will not be able to triumph of the will their way to victory over China for global influence. And they're already kind of proving to be just really bad at this shit. Unfortunately, we also have to face the fact that love or hate China, China's not coming to save us as American communists anytime soon. I mean, sure, they might support American communist parties in various ways and have relations, but again, it doesn't matter if you love or hate China. Even if you think China is the best example of actually existing socialism on Earth right now, it's just unrealistic to think that they would be coming into start a revolution in the USA right now. That would not be a good strategic move for them when all they really have to do, no matter how you slice it, is just watch the USA collapse in on itself from a distance while they slowly and surely build their position in the long run from the sidelines, step in, start influencing other nations without directly confronting the USA. I mean, to me, that feels like a much, much, much more likely scenario. And so it's up to us as American communists to build our own position. We can't sit around hoping and waiting for someone else to save us. We have to come together and save ourselves, and that means organizing. Of course, anything can happen, and things are wildly unpredictable on the global stage right now. Maybe by the time I upload this, things can happen that make much of what I'm saying sound silly and ridiculous. I don't know. I'm not saying that these predictions are going to necessarily hold forever, but from where I'm sitting right now, it seems extremely likely that the USA's power and prestige is only going to continue to diminish over time. And of course, American fascists, as they decline, as they see their own country decline, they're going to blame immigrants, they're going to blame foreigners, they're going to blame everyone and everything else but the failing American system, all the way down to the bottom. And this will lead to a lot of chaos and a lot of acts of desperation. And as the empire spins the drain, we have to brace ourselves for what's coming. We have to be organized. If you aren't already organized, if you aren't in an organization, you are already way behind. And so I implore you, please join an organization, join a party, join a communist party, join a union, organize your neighborhood, find like-minded comrades and build with those comrades. The longer we stay separated and divided, the harder it's going to be for us to weather this storm that's already started to hit land. And we have a video here at NonCompete. It's sort of a crash course on becoming politically active. There's a link in the description. Please give that a watch. Please give this book a read. This book was translated by Luna. It's the Vietnamese curriculum on dialectical materialism. You can get the ebook for free at banyanhouse.org. This really is your guide to understanding what the hell is going on right now. And we're coming out with part 2, which is on historical materialism, very, very soon. Can't wait to deliver that. I am going to make so many great videos based on the historical materialism book, so please keep an eye out for that. Let me just say, the rise of American fascism, as scary as it is, spells the end of the empire. These are the death throes of the American nightmare. The next few years are going to be very difficult, but that is all the more reason for us to come together, to teach each other, and to build. So let's get to work. I'm EJ. This is NonCompete. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care of each other. We'll see you next time.